Hi everyone, welcome to the Digital Earth Summit. My name is Shanley Mitchell, I'm one of the team members here at Earth, and we're so happy you're tuning in with us today. We have an incredible lineup of speakers and panelists ahead, so stay tuned, and don't forget you can watch the full talks at earth.co. We would like to take a moment to thank our founding partners, Neal's Yard Remedy, Vivobarefoot, and Farmacy. This event would not be possible without them.
Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Christabel Reed. I'm one of the lucky co-founders of Earth, and we've been organising this event for the past 3 months. I invite you all over the course of the day to start to meditate and learn about what maybe your role in the global ecosystem restoration movement might be, and just invite you to hopefully fall in love with this incredible solution to the polycrises that we face, but also this absolutely incredible route to being able to fulfill our human potential and to uphold the honor of being human being by being these incredible nature restoring species.
Before I start, I want to offer a libation. I want to honor the earth and all our relatives who are beyond superhuman. I want to honor all our ancestors who we stand upon, all the ancestors who stand behind us, and all our ancestors who stand alongside us. And in the Yoruba tradition, we say Ashe, Ashe, Asheo, and that means so be it. In preparing for today, I was thinking, when did we forget about reverence? When did we forget how to honor the earth, to honor each other, to give gratitude to each other? When did we forget how to speak to the earth, to each other? How are you doing today? How are you in your heart, in your mind, in your spirit, in your body? How are you doing? And I know for many of us, we're carrying this collective grief and pain with what's happening in the world, particularly with Palestine and with other conflicts around the world. We're carrying a lot of fear because of a future that we can't even begin to imagine, with biodiversity collapse, with climate crisis. And how do we overcome that? How do we come together? How do we come together as a collective and not just deal with these traumas, but to overcome those systems of harm that our food system is partially responsible for? That industrialized food system that extracts, that destroys, that oppresses people, right? What are we doing? So all these are small steps, right? But we can't all just do that in our little spaces. How do we do that as a collective? Imagine together and create those systems that we want to be living in. How are we rehearsing our freedoms? How are we creating those infrastructures of care, of well-being for each other and for the ecology that we're part of? And ecology, understand, I'm not going to use nature and environment. That's part of the issue, that we've separated those things from ourselves. We are part of this ecology. The earth and everything around us, we're part of that. So we're hurting each other. How do we repair that? And I don't have all the answers. All right, and that's what we're here for today, right? We need to work on those answers, and some of us will make connections today and go away and do some practical things. And I think we must understand that we can't all grow food, and we shouldn't have any guilt around that, because our revolution, and it has to be a revolution, has place for different people and different roles. So we need our artists, we need our musicians, we need our accountants, we need our teachers, we need our academics, we need our builders, right? Everyone has a role to play in this revolution, right? And revolution because we do need to change before it's too late. I don't know if anyone reads the reports that come out of the UN in terms of biodiversity loss and collapse. I mean, if we don't take action now, then we don't have a future. We don't even have 10 years ahead of us. So what are we going to do today? One of the other questions I like asking people is, how are you showing up? And I'm so happy that so many people have shown up today. How are you showing up? And what are you a commitment to? I'm showing up because I believe in us as humanity to change things. And what am I a commitment to? I am a commitment to revolutionary love, joy, and collective liberation. And I listened to the earth when she said, we need to dance and sing and laugh more. We have to work together across every barrier that we've created, across age, across class, across race and ethnicity, across gender. We need to remove these things and heal these things. So I see you, I hear you, I love you. All right, we don't have enough love in this world. And yeah, I love every single one of you because we are all one. Thank you.
You just heard from Dee Woods on embodying change. Thank you, Dee. Welcome again to the Digital Earth Summit. I'm Shanley Mitchell, one of the team members here at Earthed, and you have an incredible day ahead of you of speakers, panelists, experts on growing and restoration. And don't forget, you can watch the full panels and full talks at earth.co. Up next, we have Tayshaun Hayden Smith. He's the founder of Grow to Know, an organization working to reimagine green space in urban environments. Tayshaun just came out with a course on earth.co. So as you listen to him, if you're feeling really inspired, you can go over to Earth and take his full course and hear more from Tayshaun. Take it away.
Thank you for having me here. My name's Tayshaun Hayden Smith. I'm born and raised in Ladbroke Grove, North Kensington. I grew up in a council house. My mum was a single mum of four of us. You know, quite humble beginnings, and I always felt like there was a path destined for me. There were certain things that weren't meant for me. So a lot of my friends either wanted to be a footballer or an artist, musician. There were only a few things that were kind of on the horizon for people that I knew and amongst me that I grew up with, you know, and there's a stat, and don't quote me on this because I'm probably get it wrong, but certain people from certain backgrounds, they're ceiling their dreams completely lower at a certain age, at around 10, compared to those that have more privileged lives. And I feel like that definitely was the path destined for me. But growing up, I grew up in North Kensington, and some of you might know West Bay Sports Centre. So I literally spent all my time on a football pitch with my guys, with my friends. That was a place that I felt safe. It was how I could express myself. And I went on a bit of a journey, a football journey, through the academy systems. I didn't play in the Premier League or anything like that, but it took me to Cyprus, it took me to Austria. I played for a team called Kitzbühel. We won the league. Yeah, and so I was an aspiring footballer. I was trying to kind of climb my way up. And in 2017, that completely changed. So I was in Austria, and in the summer of 2017, I got these like text messages at like midnight. So I live just beneath Grenfell Tower, and so my sister was sending me she sent me a picture of like this fire that started to break out on the face of the tower that looked upon my mum's place, and she was like, "Oh, there's a fire in Grenfell." But like obviously, like anyone, you're like, oh, "Okay, that's going to be contained. Everything will be all right." And then suddenly, my phone just went ping, 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 like so many calls, so many messages, and I just saw the tower completely engulfed in flames within minutes, basically. And I just booked the first flight home and came back to absolute chaos. So I then decided that I would cancel my contract in Austria and stay home with my family and the people I knew. Obviously, at the time, we didn't quite understand what had happened. There were like pictures of people that we couldn't find. And a lot of people don't know, but actually before Grenfell was built, there were these football pitches called Green Pitch just below Grenfell. And that was a place that I grew up in. And I used to think that Grenfell was like a stadium. You know, I used to play, and I used to think there was an Arsenal scout watching me from the windows of Grenfell. Or like, I always used to play my best because I thought, you know, maybe someone's watching. So I came back home, and in our efforts to try and understand, to seek solace, and seek comfort, we congregated at a place called Maxilla. And this place called Maxilla was like under the Westway, the motorway. So there's a motorway that completely cuts through North Kensington. So in the 60s, and actually a bit of context to that, in the 60s, it was decided that the community was going to have to make way for this motorway without consultation. And I came to find this out through this journey that I've been on. But it completely displaced the community and caused ecological disruption, but also, you know, people were just literally thrown out of their homes. And then so in those moments after Grenfell, under Maxilla, people would turn to art. So you've got these really emotive kind of artwork coming on the walls. So people would graffiti like burning towers, like ask, "Where's my brother? Where's my son? Where's my mum?" And it was very, very heavy. And then people would turn up and play like impromptu jazz, which would calm the mind. And it was just this kind of place of expression of trauma. And I saw this little derelict patch of land, this brick raised bed. And bear in mind, I had no like gardening experience, no horticulture experience. I didn't even know what the word horticulture meant. And I just went into this little place and started to clean it up. So I started to tidy it up, pick up the rubbish, and I thought this isn't really reflective of my community. And people would then join me in tidying up this little patch of land. And then for some reason, and I don't ask me why, but then I decided I was going to go to the local garden centre and ask them if they had any spare plants to give us. And so, like, bear in mind, I didn't know what a plant was. You know, they all sound like Harry Potter names to me. I just, picked them up and put them in the ground. So the football pitch is literally just across the road to that patch of land. All my boys were playing football, so I'm in the garden, like, looking clueless. And I felt kind of embarrassed and ashamed. So a lot of my footballer friends would come out of football and, like, see me, and then there I was, like, hiding in the bush, like, not trying to be seen. I look back on that and I think that's quite sad, actually, because there's a perception around who should be in the garden or who should be like in nature and engaged with nature. And as a young man, I didn't really feel welcomed in that space. Not that anyone told me that, but it was just something that I felt. And suddenly I'd swap my football boots for gardening boots, which was probably quite a weird sight for a lot of my friends. And I then went on the journey. So in this garden, I would meet elders in the community. So people would walk past, share a smile. People would want to chat to me about what I'm doing, or they would want to just share what's on their mind or their thoughts. And the garden just became this kind of safe sanctuary for people to connect and engage and talk to each other. And in that, like, I would be learning about plants. So it became a classroom, a therapy room, a playground for some people. And it was through the garden that I learned the historical and the cultural kind of background of my community. You know, like, I grew up all my life living under the Westway, and my mum was, you know, someone quite well known in the community. You know, walking down Portobello Road, it would take like 3 hours, bump into everyone. which I think now looking back on it now, that's a beautiful thing, being able to know everyone and understand your community and understand people. My mum was super empathetic and yeah, very welcoming and loving. I then became to learn about all the different people in my community through this garden. And learned about gardening. So I kind of went into horticulture and gardening completely backwards. So then I set up a not-for-profit called Grow to Know. That was going to be the vehicle for change and a movement in which people could resonate with and relate to. There was no like mission statement or vision or strategy or anything like that. It was just born from just taking action. So 2 years of guerrilla gardening in the community, just taking over patches of land, and then Grow to Know was born. And Grow to Know was born in the midst of the pandemic, and so we became a voice for people who didn't have that access to nature. So I live in a council estate. I've got 2 young children, and you can imagine what it was like. And so there's so many people in survival mode in those situations that just don't have the time, the capacity, the interest, the influence to engage with nature. And so we became a bit of a platform and a voice for those that didn't have access to nature. And inequality in our borough, especially in Kensington and Chelsea, one of the richest boroughs in the country, but some of the most deprived areas, and the borough that Grenfell Tower happened in. And so Grow to Know would partner with the likes of Nike. So we did what was called Flowers on Football, which just sounds super crazy because usually football kill flowers. And definitely my mum experienced that when I was growing up. I played for a Sunday league team called Grenfell Athletic. And so in honour of the people that we lost and some of the bereaved and family and friends and community, use football as a platform. But I suddenly wanted to merge my two worlds, this world of gardening and nature and environmentalism and social activism into this football space. And suddenly, like, it's funny because my boys, like, they also don't feel like they're welcome in this space necessarily, and they'll never like openly and publicly say, "Oh, what you're doing, I really love what you're doing." But always be on the sly. It's almost like with that, like something like weird going on, like, "Yo, bro, like how do you grow tomatoes?" Like, I'm like, I mean, mate, it's not that secret, like. But it's really nice to see how like some of my friends and some of the people around me have been really like welcoming and really open minded in kind of engaging with gardens and space. And now the football team actually help us build some of the gardens, so I just give them a shout and they're like, yeah, we'll give you some hands. And so it's really nice kind of marriage of both worlds. I say it's Grenfell Athletic, who do some amazing work in the North Kensington community. And so when I came to understand about the horticultural industry in the world, the horticultural world, and I didn't know what the RHS was before getting involved in this, the Royal Horticultural Society. And I came to learn that just down the road to where I live was Chelsea Flower Show, which is like the World Cup of horticulture. And so I started to bang on the door at the RHS and say, hey, like, we're here. You've never connected with us. You never built a bridge. You've created this space, this exclusive elitist space where it's only accessible for certain people. It's no coincidence that I've never engaged in that and never been kind of told about it. And so I persisted, and we managed to get a Chelsea Flower Show garden, which told a story of social and environmental injustice. And it was really beautiful because in a space that would typically these very sensitive messages might provoke or prod or poke, people were really welcoming to it because we would connect on a really beautiful way through nature. So they'd see these beautiful plants in the garden and go, what plant is this? Like, that flower's amazing. I've got that in my garden. Like, look at the tree. Like, what's that tree called? And then they go, what's his garden about? And so the Hands Off Mangrove, the Mangrove is a Caribbean restaurant in All Saints Road, and it faced police brutality and racial injustice in 1960s. So that was the story that we were telling, at the same time telling the story of environmental injustice, so the deforestation of mangroves. And so this garden was multi-layered in messaging, so you can kind of access these messages in any which way you wanted to, or you just might want to see it as a beautiful community garden. But it was just the fertile grounds in which we can have those conversations, which I think is super important. And I always welcome conversation. It doesn't matter if you've got completely opposite ideas to me, completely different ways of thinking and philosophies. But I just think we need to create spaces in which we can have those conversations so that we can kind of find that common ground. We've also, and I'm just wary that time's running out, but we've also partnered with Penguin Random House. We built a Peter Rabbit garden in a local primary state school, which is now becoming a massive asset to them, and trying to bring it into the educational space. And then the kids, they have a concrete playground otherwise, and then we've extended into a beautiful garden which integrates kind of food growing, biodiversity and mischief. And I think mischief is super important when it comes to kids and encouraging them to get up to mischief. And obviously that's the tail of Peter Rabbit. So, and we're doing some stuff with local authority, Kensington and Chelsea. So looking at public space and how design, how we can have a sense of agency in the design of our spaces and not just have someone come in and tell us how we're going to live our lives and how things are going to look. And then we got up to mischief at Chelsea Flower Show again this year with a garden called Closing the Green Gap, which explored the inequality and access to green space in South Ken and North Ken. And another crazy stat that in the ward that I live in, Nottingdale, which is where Grenfell is, someone lives 17 years less on average compared to someone who lives in Holland Ward, which is just 10 minutes down the road. And there's obviously lots of influencing factors. So we gave that those stats a platform through, I mean, I don't know if we call that art, but some people didn't. But we gave a platform through the gap, closing the green gap. These really resilient plants that were otherwise seen as weeds, and we kind of made the point that this is a garden too. And so yeah, and this is from Ellen's book, who spoke earlier, and this is what the initial guerrilla garden looks like now, with all these beautiful trees and plants blooming and flourishing. And I just wanted to give a little sneak peek of, and this is never seen before, but we partnered with Pentagram, who are working on our new branding, our new visuals, our new logo at Grow to Know. We're setting up in a way that allows us to collaborate and partner with different brands and create campaigns that are long-term, permanent and purposeful. And so understanding, you know, where we live and how corporate is, and try and influence and give a sense of agency to people. Really appreciate you listening in and giving me the platform to speak. And I look forward to hearing to all the amazing people for the rest of the day.
And there's something so beautiful about walking through a forest full of trees. If only we looked at trees like we see people, we'd think twice about trying to cut them down. In the 70s, a man called John McCulloch took it upon himself to reclaim this space for the community, to turn it into a beautiful garden. This is something that should be at the forefront of communities, of education. The same way in which a plant relies on its roots, this is what we're doing, is we're putting a sense of permanence, a sense of purpose and intent. There's so much that we can learn from different cultures, from different ways of thinking, different ideologies, different philosophies, and I think education is at the heart of this. And if we don't connect with each other, if we don't connect with our surroundings, we don't connect with our history, then I think we'll become super isolated and we won't be able to take action together. My name's Tayshan Hayden Smith and welcome to my Earthed course, Activating Your Activism.
Up next, we have Lila June zooming in on Indigenous food systems. I have to say, this might be one of my favorite talks, so you're in for a treat.
Yaad shik aro shidene she nanisht ejit in shlando natlane bashish in ashi de shelo bilagane de chanele Taos New Mexico daint nasha akut ego de neast anisla. So greetings my relatives and my people. My name is Lila June and I am from the Nanisht Ejit clan of the Dene Nation of what we now call the Southwest United States, but we call Denebakea, the People's Land. We've been here long time, thousands and thousands of years, we believe, according to our emergence story, and we have created beautiful food systems out here in the desert, and we believe that if we can do it here, we can do it anywhere. I want to talk today about Indigenous food systems and the importance of these systems, both in teaching us how to be more sustainable today and also how to have more integrity in general, both in our social systems, our ecological systems, and even in our personal lives. Indigenous food systems for a long time have been very poorly understood by the Western world. And this is partly due to language barriers. This is partly due to intentional erasure of these systems and partly due to different paradigms colliding. So the prevailing narrative for the most part today is that Native Americans, indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, as we call it, were half-naked nomads wandering around in small populations with not much organization, not very dense populations, eating hand to mouth, looking for a berry to eat or a deer to hunt. That's the prevailing narrative that most Americans believe, and consequently, most of the world believes, because America has been representing us to the world via Hollywood, which has been very inaccurate and many times disparaging. So my PhD research focused in depth on pre-colonial indigenous food systems, their depth, their breadth, their ingenuity, their beauty, their scale, their efficiency, their brilliance, and their longstanding presence on this continent. And this research really focused on the exact opposite of that prevailing narrative, which is that indigenous peoples lived in densely populated cities and societies. Indigenous peoples had immense influence over the land. In other words, they weren't just victims of circumstance hoping to find a berry. They cultivated, and in many cases still cultivate, extremely vast gardens that are intentionally crafted and beautifully made. And so these systems, I'm going to give you a few examples because I think the best way to teach is through story. So the first story I like to talk about is the clam gardens. And the clam gardens are indigenous food systems where people would actually build these intertidal rock walls, and they would expand clam habitat in really vast ways. These clam gardens augmented clam habitat on Quadra Island by 35%. This is a huge island up in the Pacific Northwest. And what they do is they put these intertidal rock walls between the low tide and the high tide. And when the tide goes up and it recedes, this creates calmer, warmer waters where clams like to thrive. And so through this, they actually augment the space where clams can live. And the crazy thing about this system is it's 6,000 years old. Some of these intertidal rock walls have been radiocarbon dated to be 6,000 years old. This is one of the intertidal rock walls that we see. And over here on the right, you can see this little darker line in the coast region. And so this is how they would augment clam availability, not just for themselves, but for other animals and plants as well. So you can see the scale at which clam habitat was expanded. You can see all these red areas is where we see these ancient clam gardens. And so it's really interesting and beautiful how they're able to do that. Another system I want to talk about is the Shawnee chestnuts. So we know through archaeological fossilized pollen evidence that indigenous peoples moved into Kentucky over 3,000 years ago and created these beautiful food forests. And the chestnut tree was one of the main staples all the way from Maine to Georgia, all up the eastern area of what we now call the United States. And these food forests not only fed humans, again, but were feeding the entire populations of animals and any nut-eating creature. And so it's fascinating how a lot of these food systems are not human-centric. They're actually designed to feed everything around them. So I'll show you some of these chestnut trees. Unfortunately, these trees are now almost 98% extinct because of a blight that wiped them out. But these are some of the old growth, gigantic chestnut groves that people used to take care of. On the right-hand side is a chestnut that's allowed to billow out. And right now, you go to a lot of national forests and all the trees are so close together and they're so tall and skinny, they don't billow out because they're all so close together, they're fighting for the canopy. So what indigenous peoples would do is they would space out the chestnut trees. And as you space out the trees, you're doing several things. For one, you're letting the trees have more access to nutrients, sunlight, and water, right? They're not all choking each other out. This augments the tree's immune system, which prevents its destruction to blight or fungus or other tree-killing diseases. You're also creating space between the trees so the viruses can't hop so easily, or the fungi or whatever it is, bark beetles, whatever type of tree killer might be around. And so this is how they sustained the chestnut groves, is through spacing. Now, when the European colonists came in, they didn't understand chestnut management. and chestnuts drop nuts, right? So they would have all these saplings popping up all over the place. And that's how the chestnuts died out. They crowded and collapsed, which is true for many species. They need to be thinned. And so the way that they would keep the chestnuts spaced is through fire. You would burn around the chestnuts, and this would create not only spacing and kill any saplings that tried to come up and keep the big old growth trees, basically the only trees in the area, but they would also create these meadows in between the chestnuts. It would create these grasslands, which kind of thrive off of fire, repetitive, cyclic, seasonal fire. And fire was one of our main tools, and still is today, if the US government would just allow us to burn, one of our main land management tools that augments grasslands and pastures, which attract deer, elk, buffalo, etc. So we didn't need cattle or cage, pigs or cage chickens. Like, our protein would come to us because we had made a home for it. We had made pasturage, we had made grasslands. So this is a fossilized pollen soil core. And if you look at this red line here, it goes to 3,000 years ago. So the left whole column is time. And the deeper you go into the soil core, the older the sediment is, the longer ago it was deposited. This soil core was taken out of a pond in Kentucky. So we see about 3,000 years ago, chestnut pollen comes out of nowhere, right? And it comes and it stays for 3,000 years until the present. Right here is the present. We also see hickory nut come real strong. We see black walnut come out of nowhere about 2,000 years ago. This is basically a reconstruction of the forest around, because the pollen fossilizes and shows us what was where, when. Kind of cool. We have sumpweed and goosefoot, which are also these edible plant species coming into the record. And most importantly, on the right-hand side, we have fossilized charcoal, char. And this is actually showing that fire came around 3,000 years ago and stayed very steadily and was deposited into this pond without end, constantly. And so this means that there was a lot of burning going on around this pond to manage this food forest. So the lesson from this for us, I think, is that instead of building little tiny gardens, why don't we garden the entire earth? Why don't we see the earth as a garden? Because when we just focus on little apple groves or little almond groves, and we have these little monocultures, it's very cute, but it's not the same scale that we used to garden the entire earth. And that's a switch that I want a lot of people's brains to try to make, is like, maybe we don't need to do farms as much as honoring that the forest is already a farm. If you know how to select certain species, manage the understory, create mast trees, create pasturage and meadow, that your food will actually come to you and you don't need to go out and factory farm it. So there's a lot more examples. I'll just have time for about 2 more. One of the examples I like to share is the example of the Baure floodplain management. So in Bolivia, we have essentially people who 500 years ago, the system was destroyed by Spanish colonists. Long, long ago, they initiated this floodplain management system. And so the way that they would do this is, in the rainy season, the rains would come up and flood everything. And as the waters receded away, they would actually create these little funnels to funnel the water into pools. And it was this massive system in Bolivia. And it was, again, working with the land on grand scales, beautiful grand scales. And what we see here is on the left, these funnels that people would make, these huge earthen berms that would funnel the water as it receded to the left during the dry season. It would funnel both water and fish into pools. They created canals and causeways for transportation, which we see on the right. They also created raised fields and forest islands, settlement mounds, ring ditches, and reservoirs, so that they could have a perennial supply of fish. Even in the dry season, they would catch so much water and so much fish, they'd have fish year round right by their little settlement. This is an aerial view of the amount of earth that was moved. Each of these lines is where they would funnel the water down during the dry season. And they managed a huge portion of the country of Bolivia, this black dotted line, just to show you the scale on which human beings used to garden the whole floodplain of Bolivia. And so it's very cool to think that we could again one day, hopefully, create these types of systems where we're not just doing cute little farms, but we're honoring larger systems. The last and certainly not the least that I like to share is the Heltzuk herring farm, which is not so much a farm, but a coastal management strategy. So the herring are a small silverfish which come every February. And these folks actually get to create herring surface area where they lay their eggs. So when these herring come, as you can see on the left, they litter the entire coastline with eggs. So the more substrate, the more surface area that is in the coastline, the more eggs will be available to the entire ecosystem. And so what they do is they dip these hemlock boughs into the water by the thousands. And mind you, they were wiped out almost 98%. So there used to be many more Heltzuk people there before the genocide, before the disease epidemics to do this. So you can just imagine how much bigger it was in the past. And these herring boughs, these herring branches capture all these eggs, which is what this guy is showing. And it's a delicacy, it's caviar. They also will plant giant fast-growing kelp along the coastline, and this will also augment the surface area for the herring roe. So what's really beautiful about this is not just for human consumption. There are wolves that eat this. There are killer whales that will eat the salmon, that will eat the herring. There are bears that eat it up the food chain. The eagles, the herring are so central to the ecosystem that they start their new year in February when the herring come. And so it's really cool to think that this system is truly non-human centric. They put this substrata in the ocean, not just for themselves, but because they know it's going to augment the entire coastal ecosystem. The more eggs available, the more everything thrives. And as they always say, everything revolves around the herring. And one of the beautiful things they say too is the most important part of the harvest is not what you take, but what you leave behind, because you want to leave behind enough eggs that they can hatch and create more herring to come back the next year. Every single thing that I've showed you today is at least 1,000 years old, sometimes 6,000 years old. And these beautiful systems clearly knew what they were doing because they never ended. Lastly, I'll just say that the thing that keeps these systems running is not so much their cool strategies and their cool technologies and, the ways they would manipulate nature, but what kept them going was the software of the human body, which is the hardware. That software is the culture, the worldview, the outlook with which they saw everything. And that software, in this case, almost across the board, in my research is I found respect, reverence, reciprocity, restraint, responsibility, regeneration, and relationality, seeing everything as your kin, as your relative. That spirit is what really kept this thing going, because it helped them to respect the system enough to not exploit it. So thank you all for your time, and I hope you have a great time at the conference.
Up next, we have Paul Palstand, the founder of Lawyers for Nature, working to protect the rights of the natural world.
So we rarely get to compare how ecosystems look under different legal, economic and political systems. And a few weeks ago, I was in Ecuador researching rights of nature. And I went to the territory of the Icofan Sinangue and walked to this river, which is the Rio Candu, which is in their territory. And I'd never been somewhere so perfectly Eden-like. It was, to me, the epitome of how beautiful perfect nature should be. And had I can't go into detail, but a very beautiful sort of transcendental spiritual experience with that river. And just 50 miles away, in the town of Lago Agrio, which is an oil town that grew up in the Amazon from the 1960s onwards, I found another river. And that river is also a tributary of the same river as the one I just showed you, the Rio Aguarico. And unlike the previous one, this river had oil on the surface, no trees, and absolutely stank so much of sewage that you really couldn't be near it. And I think we can all agree that we want more rivers that look like the previous photo I just showed you than this one here. And then the key question for me is, how do we achieve that? And I can tell you lots of practical ways that we can restore rivers, and you can also look at it on my Earth course as well. But actually, in reality, we need to go back a step and say not just what are the actual practical things, tasks that we need to do. We need to ask ourselves, what is the relationship that we are holding with nature? And then from that relationship comes the expression of practical action. So, comparing these two systems, what we have here with this river is a system of extractive industrial capitalism, an oil town. What we had in the previous picture with the Sinangwe is a territory that is looked after and cared for by indigenous people. And I spoke to the Sinangwe and asked them why they were doing what they did and how they were doing it. And originally, there was the reason I wanted to speak to them was they took the Ecuadorian government to court in 2018 to cancel mining licenses on their territory that would have destroyed that river. And that was what I initially wanted to ask them about. But they very quickly said, actually, the law case isn't actually the most important thing. Because even when they'd won the law case against the Ecuadorian government, illegal mining was still happening on their territory. And in order to stop that, they had to, or they didn't have to, but they set up a Guardia Indígena, a group of volunteers who have a little uniform and a ceremonial stick made from a tree from their territory. And they patrol their territory, which is 60,000 hectares of primary rainforest, to stop people coming onto their territory and destroying it. And it's a really interesting mixture of deep spirituality and modern technology. So they would take yagé, ayahuasca, and the ayahuasca would guide them as to where on their territory the destruction was happening. Then they would walk to that area and use drones to work out where the destruction is happening and to take photos, and then confiscate the illegal mining equipment and call the police. So to me, that relationship that the Sinangwe had with their land is the crucial point. And wherever we see that relationship around the world, people with a deep, loving, caring, somewhat fighting connection to protect nature and protect land makes the key difference of what land will be a state like this photo and what land will be the state of the previous photo. So, in a land like England, where we lost our indigenous voice many, many centuries ago, and where it feels very difficult to resurrect that, how do we begin to resurrect that kind of relationship and embody that kind of relationship? And to me, that is best expressed in the term of guardianship. And I believe very strongly that in order to both stop the destruction of nature in these lands and also to reverse the destruction and begin restoring nature, all of us need to enter into a relationship of guardianship with nature. And that relationship, while it can manifest on a more national level, as I'll explain in a moment, around campaigning and that kind of thing, I believe really needs to come on a very hyper-local level, a specific connection to one part of nature that you protect and that you act for. And how that unfolds, I believe, is a reasonably simple process, starting with knowledge and connection. So finding a part of nature that you actually get to know and connect with. And that knowledge, I believe, when done over time, leads just almost automatically to a feeling of love towards that part of nature. And that feeling of love also then leads quite automatically to a deep desire to protect that part of nature. And that process of knowledge leading to love, leading to protection, is one that we can all step into. And it was interesting, in the Sinangwe, there was one particular member of the Guardia Indígena called Juan, who was like the most enthusiastic member, like he was really into it. And it's a voluntary thing, they don't get paid for it, but he'd give up so much of his time to patrol the forest. And I asked him why he did it, and he said it's an honor to serve on behalf of nature. And there's a certain extent to which we can pedestalize indigenous people as being these kind of magical beings that just have this knowledge from birth. And right at the end of the trip, I just sort of asked him like a question like how it was growing up in the village. And he said, I didn't grow up here. I'm from the coast in Ecuador. And I just married a Sinangwe woman 5 years ago and moved here. So the most enthusiastic member of their Indigenous Guard wasn't actually Indigenous from birth. He just stepped into that knowledge. And I say that because I want us to avoid this idea of the kind of magical Indigenous knowledge that none of us can have. I believe that we can all step into that relationship if we go through that process. And I want to give you very quickly an example of how I did that. So I've lived on a boat for 12 years, and 5 of those were spent cruising around London on the canals. And eventually I got a bit bored of that and also wanted to connect with a specific river. But there's quite a lot of territory guarding around the rivers in London. They're most of them are heavily guarded by their existing administrative people, the Canal and River Trust and Port of London Authority for the Thames and the Lee. So I literally got a map of London and sort of looked where the rivers were and found this random river slightly on the outskirts that no one seemed to be doing anything with, called the Roding, which is actually London's 3rd biggest river, but most of you probably haven't heard of it. And I just moved there on my boat with some vague idea that I would try and help restore it. And actually, without me even particularly realizing it, that process that I just outlined to you just kind of magically happened. Like, I had no intention to fall in love with the river. I had no real intention that I was going to then use that love to devote my life to restoring it as such. But that just kind of happened. And in many ways, it was easy for me, of course, because I didn't have to go for a walk every day to make sure I was getting my river connection points in. I just lived on it. So every day I would look out of the window and see the kingfisher and hear the Chettis warbler in the reeds. And that constant immersion in nature, in the river and all its creatures was enough to fall in love. But the next stage did happen really easily, because this river that I loved, that I held in my heart so deeply, how could I? How could I walk next to it and see the rubbish building up without a desire to then go and pick up that rubbish? How could I see the sewage running into this river that I loved without feeling a deep, burning anger towards the capitalist criminals at Thames Water who run a business making billions of pounds every year through deliberately destroying nature in this city? And how could I not want to plant trees that I would see grow almost like my kind of like tree babies that I'd be able to go and tend and care for? So, yeah, I went through that process, and I'm trying to think of the best ways to talk about some of the things that I've done there, because it is quite a lot. And I reiterate again that all this is on the Earth course, so the 8 episodes, I think, detailing all the different things that I've been up to on the Roding in guardianship forms over the past 6 years. But each of them have really relied on that deep connection to nature. So, for instance, talking about sewage, there is national campaigning to be done about that. We do need to put national pressure on water companies, and you know that many of you may know some amazing activists working on that national level, like Fergal Sharkey, who's done amazing things to bring attention to the sewage crisis. But it's also a hyper-local problem. And actually, many of the campaigners that now work on a national level started at a very local level of guardianship of their river, got angry about the state of their river, and then put that into national action. In fact, I think Fergal did as well. He started off fishing on the Lee and was like, why is there so much shit here? I want to stop that. Windrush Against Sewage Pollution, one of the main people that do statistical analysis of storm sewer overflow, started off on their specific river. And even on the Roding, we could have any kind of policies we want to protect our rivers, but ultimately they are irrelevant if no one is working out what's happening on the ground. So a few years ago, I went walking on the river on a volunteer day and found a sewage outlet just pouring literal turds into the river. That is illegal under the current system. So changing the law wouldn't help. It is already illegal, but nobody was monitoring it. No one even knew that was happening. So even by knowledge of it, even just by knowing that sewage was going in there and then starting a campaign for Thames Water to stop it, that makes a difference. And each and every one of you can do the same thing. There are rivers in London now that have not been monitored, have not been walked in years. And if you walked along them today, you would find crimes going on that you could stop by actually just bringing attention to it. Similarly, the amount of rubbish. Yes, it needs national policies on deposit return schemes and on clearing things up, but also actually we just need people just to go in, organise litter pick days and get it out. And you can see on the Earth course the amount that we started getting out. I mean, we do, on the River Roading Trust, we do about 5 clear-ups every winter, each one of which gets hundreds of bin bags of rubbish out of the river. It's absolutely obscene. But the key thing is that the river is now less full of rubbish. And similarly, you can... I have no training at all in ecology. I don't know I have no technical knowledge about any of this stuff. So again, in the way that we mustn't pedestalize indigenous people, don't pedestalize those that are already doing guardianship things. Actually, most of us don't have technical knowledge. I have exactly the same amount as any of you in the audience. I just started doing this thing, and in the doing of it, you gain the learning. So planting trees, I just started off planting a few trees on the edge of the river, and then they died because it wasn't a good place for trees. So I learned, exactly, sometimes you gotta learn by doing, don't you? Although you can actually look at the Earth course and I can tell you what not to do and what to do, so you don't have to repeat the same mistakes yourself. But the process of doing it is important. And then learning, okay, well actually here is where the wet trees go, so just getting some sticks of willow, which are completely free. And by the way, if anyone wants to have any wet ground they want to plant trees in, come up to me afterwards, I can get you some willow sticks to get started with, or some black poplar trees that you can plant. And just planting them in there and then realizing that, oh, actually, there's all this metal sheet piling here that also could do with some trees, but there's no mud to put the trees in. So like kind of thinking through that problem, every day I'd kind of cycle past the river being like, need to do something about that sheet piling, and then getting a eureka moment where I was like, wait a second, I could get longer sticks of willow. And then because there's no earth here or mud to plant them in, I'll make a little Hessian sack of mud for them at the bottom of it so they can root into that, and then just drop them in the river and let them grow. And then have basically naturalized the entirety of that part of the river embankment, which would normally cost tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of pounds to do. So yeah, what I guess I'm saying is that the key thing we need in this time is guardianship. And the guardians that are currently acting in the world, I can tell you there are not enough of them. And many of them are being stretched to breaking point by the pressures that are put on them, trying to hold back the tide of this system that is constantly pushing against and damaging nature. So if it's incumbent, I say, on as many of us as possible to step into that role, to relieve that pressure. And every single one of you sitting in the audience has the ability to be a nature guardian, because you don't need specialist knowledge in advance. All you've got to do is get to know a part of nature, fall in love, and then the desire to protect it will naturally arise. And I really urge every one of you to do that. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for tuning in. If you have just arrived here, you're at the Digital Earth Summit. We appreciate you for being here. We have an incredible list of talks and panels today. Up next, you'll hear from the world-renowned restoration expert, John D. Liu.
Hello, I'm John. I have to overcome my basic shyness in order to speak to you. And if they believe that, I have some real estate for you. But this is the Luce Plateau in the upper and middle reaches of the Yellow River. It's about 640,000 square kilometers, the size of France. And it's named for the geomorphological soil type, which is Luce. And it is also the cradle of Chinese civilization. So if you dig around in there, you could find interesting things. I believe he's going to strike history in just a moment. So as the introduction told you, I went there in the early 90s. And I had to study this, but this is what I found, a fully degraded landscape. It was known as the most eroded place on the earth. And so this is the birthplace of the largest ethnic group on the planet. And it was historically very fertile. And that's why it was the cradle of civilization. It actually gave birth to many other ethnic groups as well. It was in the upper and middle reaches of the Yellow River. So you had Kazakhs and Uyghurs and Mongols and Jurchit Khitan. You had many different ethnic groups there. So in this area, for generations, for 10 to 12,000 years, this place had been farmed. And the farming techniques were essentially Neolithic. So they they were doing several things, actually. They were cutting trees, they were growing crops on the sides of hillsides, and they were free-ranging goats and sheep. And so all of those behaviors were negative. They were destructive. And this was now one of the poorest places, but this is the place where the early dynasties were located. So it was amazing. And when I went out there, I compared what I was seeing to the geopolitical events in the 80s and 90s that I'd been covering as a journalist. And I concluded that this was more important than anything I'd ever seen before. And this was part of a massive pilot project called the Luce Plateau Watershed Rehabilitation Project that had about $500 million of investment. And basically everybody in the pilot area was engaged in restoring this because they couldn't do any of the things that they'd been doing. So that all the things that they'd been doing, cutting trees, growing on the sides of hillsides, or free-ranging goats and sheep, they were all banned. So it became illegal, and then they paid them to learn how to be restorers. Now, in 1994, this was the first time I went out there, and then this is 2009. So it changes what they could do in 15 years with the most eroded place on the earth. And when I saw this, I just thought, I'm going to have to study this really for the rest of my life to understand the complexity of this. But as I went through this, and I went to lots of different academic studies, I found that I could understand it. Essentially, through evolutionary succession, there was a constant accumulation of biodiversity, biomass, and accumulated organic matter. Another term for that would be necromass, which is completely analogous to biomass. And what happens is, by this accumulative process, the Earth's atmosphere, the hydrological cycle, the soil fertility is created, constantly filtered, and continuously renewed. And when you destroy that, you've reversed evolutionary succession and you're going backwards. You're having disaccumulation of biodiversity, biomass, and accumulated organic matter. And in every place that's happened, it's destroyed the civilization. So I saw that I was really only seeing two states, or degrees of function and degrees of degradation. And I started to realize that actually, if we understand this, then we can choose what we do, what we believe in. And if you look at this line, you'll see that at the time of settled agriculture, they had a more or less pristine system, but they were headed toward ecological collapse. And so it's interesting, this is the same line in all civilizations. So you can apply this in Rome or Egypt or India or the Mayans or wherever you want to go. And then when the Chinese made an intervention, that's the paradigm shift that determines whether human beings survive and create a sustainable way of life. And when I saw that, I just thought, I'll have to spend the rest of my life not only learning about this in all of its complexity, but communicating this. And when I first started to tell people, I would grab them by the lapels and tell them, you have to listen to me. And they would say, who are you? Get away. And so it was really uncomfortable. And then I just started to study, and I realized that it was possible to understand how evolutionary succession had taken place, and to realize that the Earth, when it formed, was a molten rock surrounded by poisonous gases, and that over evolutionary time, about 3.8 billion years, the life began, and it started very simply, but then it began to differentiate and speciate, and it led to a beautiful garden. And the process, it's photosynthesis, and it's a biochemical photoreactive process that basically breathes. So all of life is breathing and all of life is dying. And the cycle of life and death is accumulative. And when we understand that, then everything kind of comes into some sort of awareness, and there's beauty and synergy and symbiosis, and everything makes sense. And you also realize that human beings come very late into this equation. And when human beings arrive, they are not aware of what this is, the miraculous qualities of life. And they begin to destroy the perfect system. And to understand that this is the only planet that we know that has an oxygenated atmosphere, or a freshwater system, or fertile soils, or amazing biodiversity. And when we look back, this is actually a few years ago in Ethiopia. So the kind of concepts of slash and burn are still going on. I always say Og was the first farmer, and he thought plowing would be a good idea. And he used a sharpened stick to kill all the plants that he didn't understand, and he spread the seeds of the one plant that he wanted. And so he created monocultures and plowing simultaneously. And what I have understood now is that the biodiversity was organizing to mitigate or to regulate the physics. And so if you remove this ability to regulate the physics, you get a climate which more resembles the moon or Mars or Venus or other places which don't have an oxygenated atmosphere or freshwater system and fertile soils. In looking at this, I realized it's possible to rehabilitate large-scale damaged ecosystems. So if we can, why don't we do that? And that took me into another level, because I realized that all the civilizations that have come before us have made the same mistake. So the level of difficulty and the level of complexity is enormous, because we're trying to do something that humanity has never been able to do. Common land has emerged, and then through this I've had the ability to go all over the world and study. And personally, I felt seriously that the knowledge is a responsibility, and I was dreaming, like, how could we deal with this? And I kept having this recurrent dream that people were going to go camping and fix the earth. And I wrote this essay called Earth Restoration Peace Camps, which was published in Permaculture magazine. And tens of thousands of people responded. And that was where this began. Now there's 65 camps around the world after 6 years. And the first one in the United States was at Paradise, California, where 85 people died in a horrific fire that followed decade-long drought. And what happened was I was called on the day of the fire from a guy driving with his tires on fire. He said, "You have to come now. Paradise is lost." So I said, "Of course." I went there and I told them about ecosystem restoration camps, and they all said they wanted one. And so thousands of people showed up to help this community to rebuild. And they were so devastated and crushed by the tragedy that they really needed this energy. And so many people came, and so much goodwill and positive action took place that it really energized them, and they're rebuilding their community. And I've just recently been contacted by the people in Maui who had the same thing happen. And we've been talking in Turkey, and we've been working out designs for how you could have communities that can prepare and have the social infrastructure that's needed to do restoration in place, and the training which is needed, and be able to move immediately. So I used to tell people, you have to prepare for the crisis, but actually we're in the crisis now. So we have to act really with efficiency and effectiveness. It's possible to grow soils. We have to grow soils This is carbon sequestration. But carbon sequestration is not something which is happening alone. It's an indicator of systemic dysfunction on a planetary scale, multiple systems which are collapsing. And so we don't want memes. We want consciousness. We want to do collaborative inquiry for collective intelligence. This is Rene Haller. He's like Yoda to me. He could take absolutely degraded landscapes with no soils whatsoever and turn them into the Garden of Eden. And so when you understand this and you realize what is possible, you do want to grab people by the lapels and shake them and say, hey, you got to listen to me. But that doesn't work. So what you really need to do is you need to have dinner a lot. And you need to play together, and you need to learn together. So we've been recommending communal gardens that are curated by master gardeners who are joined by everyone in the community, but who lead with their knowledge. And everyone has the opportunity to become a master gardener. But everyone on the planet, we need everybody to work together. And we need to do this on a planetary scale. We need to act as a species on a planetary scale. And so we have to understand that legacy genomes and ancient DNA are different than the DNA of the plants and trees that have been bred for rapid growth and for crops. And we need to protect. So we're also recommending creating botanical sanctuaries where the most endangered species are all protected. So there is a role for everyone, and everyone can learn, and they can learn by doing. And because we don't have theoretical problems, we have physical problems to all the different systems, and we have broken hearts because we're facing the trauma of very long-term domination, of mistakes, historical mistakes that have caused many people to lose their basic human rights. And we need to realize that the energy that flows through each individual is the same energy that flows through the entire cosmos. And we need that energy to flow intentionally toward what humanity needs to do. I've been using the term healing the planet, healing the earth, and the human spirit. So if we do that, then we will learn to live together. We'll learn to feed the hungry. We'll learn to make sure that everyone has a place to stay and that everyone has the right to do what they can do. And we will realize that the earth systems are more valuable than the materialism and the consumption and the waste that we've been creating around the world, because that's ultimately just ruins. And we have to look at what is true and what is beautiful. And we are going to be the ancestors for the generations to come, and we need to do the right thing. Thank you.
We could not do this without our incredible founding partners. And the next panel is brought to you by Farmacy. It's on transforming food and farming systems.
Hi, my name is Sarah Langford. In 2017, I had a kind of life pivot involving the reality of having 2 small children and wrote a book about being a barrister, and then accidentally moved to a farm in Suffolk. And I now manage my parents-in-law's arable and pasture farm in mid-Suffolk, and I wrote a book about that journey and the journey of the farmers who taught me how to farm in a book called Rooted, which was published last year. And now, I mean, I've got a very kind of long and illustrious panel alongside me. Next to me is Finn Harris, who is the co-founder and chief designer of Juntos Farm, a community space in the heart of Ibiza, dedicated to regenerative farming, local food production, although your background thing is architecture. Yes. And you graduated with an architectural design with a minor in environmental studies. And the whole idea about Hunters Farm is really to try and provide an educational establishment as well as regenerative farming, but we can talk about that in due course. To my left is someone who probably also needs no introduction to anyone here, but I'll give it anyway. Hugh Fenley-Whittingstall's multi-award winning writer, broadcaster, and of course has created the hugely popular River Cottage TV series and books, but of course is also a campaigner, long-term campaigner for the production of seasonal, ethically produced food, and has campaigned on documentary series about fish, war on waste, Britain's fat fight, war on plastic, and had a book out last year, which is the River Cottage Good Comfort book. But you also, Hugh, I think, work, as well as writing, you're vice president of a conservation charity called Fauna and Flora, and patron of Switchback, a charity that helps young offenders find opportunities in catering. To the left of Hugh is Geeti Singh Watson, who has been in pubs for 20 years, I think is the short.
Heading for 30, I think.
Heading for 30. And started, I mean, I was told in my briefing, the first organic pub in Britain, but I think it was the world. 1989, Duke of Cambridge in Islington, after some time in the restaurant industry, during which time I think Geeti was pretty horrified by the waste and lack of responsibility.
It was 98. I'm not that old.
Oh, what did I say?
89.
Oh, I'm so sorry. That is really rude. And as now you've just opened your fourth pub down in Totnes called The Bull, which abides by what you've delightfully called the no bull rules, which is a ethical and sustainable prism with which to make every decision that goes on in the pub. And then finally, Camilla Fayed is the founder of Farmacy in Notting Hill, which I think has just celebrated its 7th birthday. That mission was really a plant-based restaurant to try and relink health and food, hence the name, Farmacies. This panel is going to try and look at transforming food and farming systems, but of course inherent within that are many layers. But what we might do is come to everybody on the panel and talk about what we hope we might be aiming for, because we can't work out how we're going to get there unless we work out what we want. Maybe I can kind of go down the panel asking about your vision for what a truly transformed food and farming system might look like. We might have similarities, we might have differences, but tell us what we might be eating in this system, how the food is grown, and who is eating it. Finn, do you want to kick off with that?
Yeah, great. Hi. Well, it's really exciting to be here and see so many faces, a lot of familiar faces of people who are gathered around this topic. I'm sure we've all gone on our own journeys of learning about some of these challenges, and it gives me a lot of optimism to see people coming together and having these conversations. So maybe I'll speak more about it as we go on, but I'm involved with this project in Ibiza. It's a very ambitious project to convert an old dairy farm in the middle of the island into a sort of regenerative hub. And our mission is to accelerate this transition to regenerative agriculture. And so we've been asking ourselves this question. There's a team of us, there's about 26 people involved with the project now. You know, what does it look like? And we hear a lot about these terms about regenerative, but I think we're still, you know, trying to work out what the definitions are. And where we've landed specifically for our project is we really focus on culture, you know, and we sort of forget agriculture, like it's really in the name. And so we're asking, you know, what does it mean to bring people together around local food production? And Ibiza is this sort of extreme version of what we're seeing in many places around the world. So I'll give you, I'll sort of ground you in some easy statistics here. So over the last 30 years, the island, which is a small island, it's about 150,000 residents, has lost 90% of its arable land. And on average, about 4% of the food that's consumed is grown there. And so the sort of the tangible result of that is just a real disconnection from food. You know, the majority, 96%, is shipped in. And so what we're trying to do is create a space. We have a farm, 8 hectares of regenerative farmland, but that's really just part of what we're doing. We're trying to create a space where you can see the full food economy in one site. And what that means is to bring people into the process of cultivation, transformation, where we transform food into more premium products, and then a community space as well, where you can come and enjoy it. You can trade food on a marketplace. And I think this, for me, and in my community in Ibiza, is really what's missing is a connection to the land and to the food that's grown in a way that's exciting and almost romantic, because I think, part of my background is in storytelling. We need to change the story about what it means to grow food, to be connected to it. I'm almost the opposite to Guy. I grew up in London. I've always been in my life, like, my connection to food is like the plastic bag that it comes in the local supermarket. And our team is sort of split, half farmers and half sort of urbanites who have escaped the city to try and reconnect. And so we bring almost that experience into what we're doing. We come with our own disconnection and our own desire to sort of like learn more about how our food's grown and how to connect with it. So yeah, in short, it's about culture for me. It's really about trying to define a community environment where we really enjoy the process of connecting back to our food.
That's really inspiring also, because you're living the vision. You're trying to realize your vision. It's not simply in your head.
I'll just add, we have this tagline. I mean, many people will know that Ibiza's reputation, but our tagline, one of our taglines is celebrate life. And when you sort of get into that, what does it mean to celebrate life? Like living life across all systems. And so we bring celebration into the heart of what we do, and I think that's really important.
Thank you. Hugh, your vision for food and farming in the future.
Well, I think that the vision of a healthy food system, from my perspective, pretty much catapults straight forward to what people are actually eating and how they're doing on it. So, I mean, I don't have the same level of expertise about growing systems as Guy and others on the panel. But there is at least a theoretical way of changing the food system, and it's entirely in our hands, because as consumers, nobody's really forcing us to buy stuff. I mean, not physically. They don't march us down the supermarket aisles and push the junk into our trolleys for us. We do actually make those choices ourselves. The different world I'd like to see is one where almost everybody's eating food that is, most of which is grown fairly close to where they live, hasn't been massively altered by industrial processes, is mainly made from plants, and it's almost as simple as that. I mean, and if that was happening, then the agricultural system to deliver it would have been transformed, because if all the junk stays on the shelves and the food that's been heavily processed no longer sells, the people who sell food will slowly have to adapt to our demands. Of course, that is a bit of a fantasy, and what stands in the way of that fantasy, which Guy's referred to, is the extraordinary power of a system that pretty much is able to dictate what we're going to eat. And that for a lot of people do feel powerless, or certainly behave as if they are powerless in the food choices that they make. And I suppose my end of the transformative wedge, I don't know whether it's the thick end or the thin end, but has been to try and rouse people's own feelings about the food that they eat, and try and get consumers to behave differently and to want difference and to care. The problem is the people who have got no idea that this is happening today, who couldn't give a damn about any of us or what we're talking about. But those people still deserve to eat great food, and they deserve to be much better informed about the quality of the food that they eat. And they also need to understand from fairly early on in their lives what the consequences of making poor choices will be. So one of my big questions is, how can we really change demand? And it is going to boil down to education, but then we should never forget that ultimately what we eat, the choice is ours.
Just before I move on to Geeti, I really just want to pick up on this so I don't forget it, because choice is an interesting word. Free choice is an interesting idea because it's linked entirely with knowledge and understanding, isn't it? So you can say you have a free choice to go down a supermarket aisle and you're responsible for the food that you then pick up off that shelf.
But of course, it isn't a free choice because of the powers of the market and the powers not least of advertising. Advertising actually works, and it does persuade an awful lot of us to eat an awful lot of rubbish. It's a frighteningly powerful force in our lives.
There's a great example of that. I don't know if anyone knows this. When London Transport banned advertising chocolate and sweets on the tube, consumption fell by 19.5%.
There you go. These are the kind of things we can do at a policy level to move the dial. And I think we do, and we do want politicians who understand that they can move the dial with policies like that and that they will help human health by doing the right thing.
Yeah. And of course,
can I just butt in?
Yeah.
I mean,
always.
choice is grossly overrated. We give no choice in our veg boxes. We give no choice when you come and eat in the Riverford Field Kitchen unless you have special dietary requirements. And people love it. Most people are just so confused by the choices, the 50,000 SKUs that you're presented with when you go into a supermarket. I mean, it's actually not what most people want, and there is market research to confirm that. I mean, the Food and Farming Commission have just done some, and they don't want choice. They do.
Definitely.
Giti, your vision.
Well, it seems to me there are two fundamental aspects to this. One is equality, how we can ask people to change how they eat if they don't have the finance to do it is completely fundamental. So we talk constantly about the cost of food, affordable food, but actually we need to talk about affordable accommodation. And I'd like to see us pay properly for food, because food has the power to seriously impact climate change. Instead of continually pushing down the price of food, we need to be pushing down the price of rent so that people can afford to pay for decent farming. I think there's absolutely no doubt that everybody wants decent food, but without the facts, the information about what you're buying, like I talked about, and we're both very passionate about this, we are lied to constantly about what we are buying and eating. So how the hell are we supposed to make those right choices? Restaurants all over the country lie to you constantly. It is absolutely shocking. Hold them to account over and over again. Ask them a question about their fish policy. It is disgusting, the lies that that are spun at you. And we don't know the answers. How are we supposed to interrogate a fish policy? How are you supposed to know is it okay to eat bluefin tuna now? Because apparently it's popping up all over menus in London. It's absolutely shocking. And the fact that it's caught in Cornwall makes it sustainable is bullshit. But when I first opened my first pub in 1998, trading standards came to me at least twice a year, and they would walk in and they'd say, prove it. Prove that's organic, prove that's fair trade, prove that's local. And we had to, and it was brilliant. And Weights and Measures used to come in, and I'd love it, was one of my favourites. They'd come in and they'd order their drinks, and then they'd get out their little scales and start measuring everything, and you'd get fined if you'd poured somebody. None of that happens now. I haven't had either of those visits for over 10 years. That's because this government cut all the funding to the people who hold the market to account. So how is anything supposed to move forward without that? So first and foremost, we need a government who's going to legislate with intelligence to protect our health and our planet. So it's all about how you vote. It's all about putting pressure on your local MP. I don't see that there's anything else we can do other than change this.
Playing devil's advocate for a moment before I move on. How about no government? Power to the people. Well, I mean, I was kind of going to say that because everybody on this panel, except for me, I guess I wrote a book about it, but everyone on this panel has said, yeah, these are the government structures, this is the law, there's plenty of law, which, as you just said, isn't enforced. The law might be there, but the enforcement is missing. But you've all managed to set up businesses which have gone against the grain, successful businesses, despite that. So Camilla, maybe you can do your vision.
Thank you, everyone. It's a real honor to share the stage with such pioneers of the movement. And I think I see, eye to eye with each and every one of you, but also, having that same disgust and that real sense of feeling of the injustice in the food system is what pioneered Farmacy 8 years ago. And just exactly, I caught the end of Guy's talk, but the lies that we faced within the systems, the supply chain, that we, when we were setting up the business all these years ago, it was so difficult to find organic produce. So taking matters into our own hands, we started our own farm. It's now Demeter certified, so we farm biodynamically, and it's 1 acre plot. And what we've been able to do with that 1 acre has been absolutely exponential. And we sit, in a 60-seater restaurant in Notting Hill, and we have seen the most incredible transformational I suppose system that we've created now. But also going off what Geeti was saying is that there needs to be more businesses like this serving people, because we find that the more and more we can do actually working with people on a human level is where we can change systems. How do we transform these systems is what Michael Pollan quite rightly says, is that it's about getting to know your farmer, shaking hands with that farmer, knowing his name. Or hers, absolutely, because that's really where we can impact change on that real local level. Yeah.
One of the things that has already come up on the panel, and certainly in the conversations that I have with farmers. I'm on the steering committee of our farmer cluster group, so I've have regular kind of contact with those around me, is something which we're, I guess, calling a knowledge gap, an ecological knowledge gap. A lost generation, someone I know calls it, because the structures which rewarded farming out of a bag or a bottle took away the ecological knowledge that came with working with natural systems. And Finn, I just wanted to ask you, because I know that Junto's farm did not start out as an educational facilitator. It started out really as a regenerative farm and has pivoted. Is that kind of knowledge gap something that made you do that? And how do you go about filling it? Because that surely is also part of how we transform this system.
Yeah, so I mean, we've had the opportunity over the last, when I recently started this degree in permaculture, and one of the things that's often talked about, although not always practiced, is to try and observe the landscape for a year before you take any action. And we've taken this sort of similar approach in the way we are carrying out this project. We are trying to observe the system by which we're interested in changing and transforming, and try and work out what pieces are currently there, where the bottlenecks are, where the challenges are. And one of the things we identified early on is there's as Guy spoke to earlier, there is, as in many places, a sort of aging population of farmers who are holding on to knowledge that is being passed down through generations. What makes Ibiza quite unique is industrialization never really hit. So that, like, for example, the average size of a piece of land for a farmer is 5 hectares. So it's still relatively a small scale economy farming sector. And in that are these sort of wisdom holders, these knowledge holders. And so a big part of our project at the beginning now is to bring people through. We spent the last 6 months, we received a grant from EIT Food to do a sort of proof of concept study. And so we spent 6 months bringing as many farmers as we can, Ibisenko farmers, local farmers, to the project to participate in round circles and debates and workshops to try and establish what body of knowledge exists on this island for this climate, the Mediterranean climate, what techniques have been practiced previously, and how does that combine with what we're bringing in, which is the sort of contemporary framework and understanding around regenerative agriculture, which is still very much being defined and shaped, and anyone you ask has a different definition of what it looks like. So what we're trying to do is hold any local wisdom and knowledge that exists on the island, and then create a space where those who are hungry to learn about what regenerative agriculture is can come and see it in practice, and be in group settings where they can sort of participate and start to get a little bit closer to bringing that into their own lives. And when we're approaching our site, we look at 5 systems. We look at food, shelter, energy, water, and waste. And all 5 of those systems are part of what makes up our farm. And we're trying to close the loop on all of them. And when we broaden it out, I mean, waste is a huge one. That's something that's often overlooked in farming and food systems. That when you broaden it out, like that. And as you said, my background's architecture as well, so I've sort of come in from a slightly different lens. I find people get more engaged. You know, people can relate, if not directly to being on the ground growing food, they can relate to water systems, they can relate to biodiversity, they can relate to the buildings that they're sitting in and what materials those are made out of. And so I'm really interested in broadening the conversation a little bit to the system of food, you know, the full economy beyond just growing. And in that, more people can get involved and start to reconnect back to the source.
How we get to this transformation, I think so much of it is around linking farmers, you know, to not just to their customers, but everyone who's interested in it. And I think some of the best farms that I see, the most progressive, the ones that are doing most interesting things, are one where there is often a couple, often one of them comes from outside the farming industry, and there is this fertilization of ideas. I mean, farmers, most of us are pretty introvert. We just like to be out in the field on our own with our heads down, don't really like talking to people very much, don't like IT, don't like social media. I mean, there are exceptions, clearly. But where you bring those things together, I think that can be a really, you know, great things can happen.
Well, you've been an amazing panel, amazing audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget that you can listen to all of these talks, the full speeches, at earth.co. The next panel is Growing Community, brought to you by Neal's Yard Remedies.
My name's Christabel Reed, and I'm one of the happy co-founders of Earth. And if you didn't already know, Earth is a nature skills platform. We are a charity, and we exist to help every balcony, city, farm, river, forest burst with life. And we know, we believe, and we are acting from a place of knowledge and conviction that humans can grow into their full potential to uphold the honor of being human being, of being ecosystem engineers, of being nature restorers, of being nature guardians, of being community growers. And I'm so happy and lucky to be here with you all, to be learning together from these incredible teachers.
So this is the Growing Community panel. I'm Jack Harries. I'm the co-founder of Earthrise Studio, which is a media company dedicated to communicating climate change. I feel like I should say that my identical twin brother was speaking on the panel earlier. I'm not him. I'm not an expert on farming. This is why I'm hosting this session with an amazing panelist. I'm really excited to be here with these guys today. I'm sure lots of people here know Christabel and Ruby and how unbelievably hard they work and how clever they are, but to have watched them grow the Earth platform over the last year has been nothing short of inspiring. Yeah, I feel like we should give them a round of applause. So please, if you do one thing, well, I'm sure you'll do many things after listening to all the inspiring talks today, but please tell everyone about Earth. Make sure they sign up. It's a charity, it's a beautiful platform, and it has so much potential. Okay, on to my panelists. We have an amazing panel of inspiring growers here today, and I just want to say each of these guys have their own individual story of how they got into growing, and we're going to dig into that today. Start with you, Tayshan.
So, my name's Tayshan Hayden-Smith. Born and raised in Ladbroke Grove, North Kensington, and I took action in my community through guerrilla gardening after the Grenfell Tower fire, and I then founded a not-for-profit activism kind of movement called Grow to Know, and yeah, we're on our own journey of growing too.
Hi, my name is Poppy Okocha. I grow at a home scale and a community garden scale. I share what I do on social media, and I write about it, and I talk about it. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Ella Miles. I'm a writer and campaigner for increasing urban nature through my campaign Nature is a Human Right and my social enterprise Dream Green, which empowers communities to get guerrilla gardening. And I've also written books on each of those two things.
My name is Laura Kesteler. I grew up in Germany and got introduced to growing permaculture and community living at a quite young age, and lived in an intentional community for a number of years, and then started to travel and be a kind of an eco-nomad, to go to different projects, to learn there and to contribute. And at the moment, I'm still part of the permaculture and eco-village movement, and I work as a network weaver for Ecolease, which is a meta-network bringing these all together.
I'm Ed Morrison, and I founded a company called Roots Allotments, which looks to give people everything they need to get growing, as well as access to an area to grow on. We take private land and make it accessible to more people.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ed. Thank you all for your introductions. I would love to just start by digging into your journeys and how you came to growing. I'm kind of fascinated in that. And Laura, maybe let's start with you. You said you've been doing this for a long time, since you were very young. I know that regeneration is at the heart of what you do at EcoLease as well. So tell me a little bit about your journey into this space, how it came to be, and then ultimately I'd love to know a bit more about EcoLease and what it is.
Right. Thank you for the question and the curiosity, which I think curiosity is a big part of what brought me into this field as well. And also a deep nature connection from just being a kid, which I assume many of you will share. And then also crisis that brought me into this field. So beyond growing up as a kid where I wasn't so aware of all the world issues, which I think is a good thing. Otherwise, eco-anxiety and all of these different challenges would start maybe even earlier. But yes, as a teenager, I got much more aware of all these crises, ecological, social, economic, psychological, cultural, I mean, all of them, like many of you, I'm sure. And then also personal life crisis, where a lot of the family structure, the house, the home, many things that I knew were basically breaking down and falling away. And that was then a 2-3 year process, but it brought me to live at the end of that process in an intentional, sustainable community in the south of Germany, where around 15 people decided to live there. It was an old farm, lived there as a community. It was a huge step for me beyond a family that broke down to actually then live in a community, to have that sense of belonging, that social fabric, to have at least a small piece of land where we're growing some food for the community, and to also invite other people that were also on that kind of journey, on that transition, to learn and to share and to exchange. So that was a huge step for me and really bridged all of the feelings and the challenges with something very proactive, something very constructive, something creative, something collaborative that we can really do, even if it's on a small and local scale. And I feel that was a huge inspiration and drive that inspired everything else that I've been doing since then, which is like around 14 years ago now. And really joining up with other people, also living in communities, also growing, also trying to lead eco-social transitions in their local regions, and to join up with other people, join forces, join networks, also learn how to cultivate networks, like we're cultivating soil and plants and gardens.
Amazing, thank you so much. I think that's what I'm so excited to learn about in this panel, is how we can foster more of these grassroots communities and taking action as a collective. I was in the Transforming Food Systems talk earlier, I'm sure many of you were, and it was so inspiring, but at times I can feel so overwhelmed of like, well, I'm just an individual living in London, like what can I do? How can we transform this massive system? And it's really inspiring to learn how you guys have taken action. Taishan, I'm going to come to you next. I know that you've started your journey much more recently. As you said, you started Grow to Know in the wake of the Grenfell Tower. I lived for many years in Ladbroke Grove and indeed on the road of Grenfell Tower, and I was there that night that building went up in flames. And so I'm really curious to understand what that catalyst moment was for you to start this project, and why you felt growing was a really powerful tool that the community could use to process that event.
Yeah, I mean, my route into this is not your traditional one. I guess, again, it was kind of like through tragedy, through trauma, through challenges, and I'd say that the garden saved me at a time of need, but like then reflecting on it, because in the moment you're not really thinking like of a plan or a strategy or a solution, you're just responding. And in the moments after Grenfell, there were places where people would congregate and kind of to stand side by side with each other to try and understand what happened. And in those moments, it just so happened that I turned to the garden. Don't ask me why, I have no clue. Well, I have my ideas, and actually my late mother was a massive influence in her adoration and admiration for nature. So my mum was terminally ill from a very young age, and but it kind of really did flip her perspective on life and her outlook on how she was going to raise us as her children. She was a single mum of 4 of us in a council house, and so it was in those moments of chaos where mum would like stop, like me and my 3 younger siblings would be up to mischief, like super naughty. It was a house of chaos, like that's an understatement. But it would be in the moments where mum just would like pause the room and go like, can you see the colors in the sunset? And then like for 10 seconds we'd be quiet, and then like
point out the colours, and then we'd get up to our like mischief again. And then she had this thing about like the textures of the trees and the bird song, and like growing up in inner city London in Ladbroke Grove, there's not much, and the stuff that is there, like there is stuff, but when you're in survival mode, you're not really in a place to be appreciating. Like, it's a luxury to engage with nature in that way and to have a relationship with nature. You need time, you need energy, resource, space, and all of these things historically, especially within Ladbroke Grove, when you give context to what happened with Grenfell. Grenfell was one of many injustices, not just in Ladbroke Grove, but in the world. That just goes to show how marginalised communities and people who don't have the, when you look at the inequality and access to green space and access to safe space and beautiful space in the borough, like you look at South Kensington, they got the front gardens, the back gardens, the private squares, the rooftop gardens. They've got everything they need to be present, to be in the moment, to have a relationship with nature. And I found that I was kind of like growing up. If I didn't have my mum, I wouldn't see the world in that way. So I very much put it down to my mum's influence on me. And then it was just at a time when, when Grenfell happened, and we obviously lost 72 people's lives, because of neglect. And it made me think about, it made me ask some serious questions of myself at the time. And I've got 2 young children who are in the audience here. And it kind of really does give me context, give you a different way of looking at things. And it's like what is my purpose? Like, where do I fit into this? The sense of place and the sense of kind of agency in your community. So yeah, Grow to Know is almost like a vehicle in which we can implement that change in the triangle of education, community, and design. And it's taken a few years of experimentation and collaboration and piloting things and not having a clue what I'm doing. But there's beauty in that as well, because you don't know where you're going. So things don't go to plan, but then you learn a lot from that. And it's a creative process. I think it can be joyful and really positive and happy, because there's a lot of, like you said, eco-anxiety, and actually we need to try and captivate the minds of young people to go, yeah, this is cool to be involved in. This is something that I feel a place in.
Beautiful. And yeah, definitely give that a round of applause. Ellen, I'm going to come on to you next. You founded Nature as a Human Right, which is an organisation I'd love to know more about. You're also a passionate guerrilla gardener. I love this term of guerrilla gardening, and I want to dig more into that. So maybe tell me a little bit more about your organisation, and maybe define guerrilla gardening. I'm sure we're a well-educated audience here, but let's unpack that a little bit.
So Nature as a Human Right is a campaign I started in 2020 in response to the lockdowns and the huge disparities in access to nature that we saw at the time. It's interesting that a lot of our kind of journeys into growing seem to have come out of some kind of trauma or collective need, and it was very much a case that my local park had been closed, and around me there was millions of people without gardens, and we all intuitively at that time knew that we needed green spaces for our minds, for our bodies, and so I think I just thought it should be a human right to access these spaces. And so I was like, oh no, it really should be. Okay, I'll start a campaign to make it. And so that's kind of an ongoing thing. Poppy was actually one of the first ambassadors for the campaign. And it's been, I've spoken to the United Nations envoy for human rights and the environment. They brought in the right to a healthy environment, so we were kind of discussing bringing in the right to nature as well. And I'm still running Nature as a Human Right, but kind of what happened on that journey was that I realized it was a very long-term, very top-down goal, and I wanted to see more tangible, more immediate impact in my neighborhoods. And I was actually working for a council at the time, not my council, I was working for Ealing Council. And through that, I kind of realized, and through trying to contact my own council, I realized that they have challenges, they have resource limitations, they're quite risk averse, because if they misstep a tiny step, there's going to be some kind of real dogged person kind of coming after them. But I think, Tayshan, you and I have discussed a lot about how, the council I was working in, I was meant to be serving a community that were miles up the road, a bus away, and they was kind of felt like we were in this ivory tower, not listening to the community, just kind of deciding for them what to do. And that was happening with green spaces too. And so I just decided that communities should be the ones that have a say in how their neighborhoods are run, and that this greening should come from the ground up, and rather than be imposed on people, why not put people at the heart of cultivating that nature? And it's our right to have that access, and it's also our responsibility as people, I think, to care for the earth and to care for our neighborhoods. And that's essentially what guerrilla gardening is. It's it's got this very warfare-y type title, but it's just this idea that like it's grassroots greening. So it's not coming from the local authority, it's coming from the people that live there. It's people greening their streets, their neighborhoods, whether that's with like food, flowers, you can cultivate like food sovereignty, biodiversity, beauty, like cleaner air, cleaner soil, community spaces to educate children in nature, which is currently like a privilege that a lot of people don't have. And so I kind of went on a mutual aid group at the time and reached out to lots of people, and we got together and we would just kind of go every week. Someone would nominate a different place in their neighborhood in our kind of like local area. Because I believe like you should do it in your local area. That's the whole idea of it being like recommoning in our right. Like it's your right to kind of do it in the place where you've put down your own roots, but like don't be a missionary and kind of go and try and interfere with someone else's space. And yeah, so it kind of all grew from there. And since then I founded Dream Green, which is a social enterprise that we've provided micro grants to communities, guides, resources, toolkits, connections, all the kind of things you might need to get guerrilla gardening. And I've seen that kind of, there's like ripples of it changing now, and I really believe in it as a solution to connecting people to nature, regreening the world, and I think we need to kind of trust communities and trust people to do that. But the only way we're going to get that is by allowing people to. And it's interesting what you said, Jack, about, you kind of guessed that we'd all had like real like nature connection as young people, and I certainly didn't. I grew up in Hackney, it's still quite a green area, but like my parents never gardened. Like at school, you don't learn how to grow stuff. You learn like the cross section of a plant, but like you never learn any of those practical skills. And so I first learned to garden, to grow in the street by guerrilla gardening, by learning from my community. I didn't know that you had to put a bulb with the roots down. So this woman had to come and be like, you have to do it like this. And so it was like through community and through like building that kind of trying to give back to the community and giving back to nature that I finally felt connected to my area, to my community, and to nature.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Brilliant. Thank you. I also recently planted bulbs for the first time ever. I didn't realize that tulips were onions. You guys probably all know this, but it's the onion family. Apparently you can cook with it if you don't have an onion. Didn't know that. Nature's amazing. Ed, I'm going to come on to you next. You also came to your journey of growing more recently. You've spoken a little bit about it. It was during the pandemic. I know that you're very inspired by the teachings of Charles Dowding. I'm also a huge fan of Charles and his YouTube channel. And obviously he's a big advocate for no-dig gardening. So tell me a little bit about what that is maybe, and then what led you to found your organization, Roots Allotments.
So no-dig gardening is the principle of feeding the soil instead of disrupting the soil. You pretty much put a layer of cardboard on the ground and then anything from 2 inches to 10 inches of compost on top of it, and you plant straight into it. And then all of the microbes and the worms that do the good things in the soil, so they transfer all the nutrients and minerals into a bioavailable state for plants to absorb. They can come up and start to process your beds as well. So instead of you ploughing it or double digging it, as tradition might say, it's just a yearly application of compost, which you can start to make at your own home with ingredients that you come up with out of your kitchen. It's more of a circular system when it comes to growing food. And yeah, I am a massive fan of Charles Dowding. Even though he doesn't claim to have invented no-dig, he has been really hitting that drum for the last 40 years, and he's had a lot of opposition against his mindset and the technique that he has been promoting. So it's really lovely to see him getting some credibility now after he has been championing it for a long time. But no-dig has existed as a growing technique going back thousands and thousands of years. It's just that we're only discovering it now in the age of industrial agriculture and all the damage that it's done to the planet. So yeah, my sort of story kicked off around lockdown. I had spent 7 years working in advertising agencies, working on some pretty questionable brands and projects, whilst also going to climate protests at the weekend, and then coming in on Monday at the office and just not wanting to be there. I was incredibly depressed, and I decided to just sack off life in London and go and live with my grandma in Devon. And I was at a local growing meeting. Charles came to did a talk, and I didn't stop writing notes in my phone. Like, everything he said just made so much sense. And like what we've brought up on this panel about that eco-anxiety, I was looking for something to quell that sort of anxiety within me and feel like I've changed my diet. I'm not buying as much stuff. I'm trying to live as frugally as possible. Like, what next steps can I feasibly do? And then I started to discover what was going wrong with our food system. And as a vegetarian, to find out that 1/3 of supermarket produce could contain up to 14 different pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, or pesticides, well, I've said pesticides already, that sort of shook me. And I was like, what am I eating? Am I eating poison? So Charles sort of inspired me to consider growing, and then lockdown happened. And I mean, I'm not a prepper, but when you see people fighting over toilet paper in the supermarket, you go, what could be next? Probably fighting over a carrot or a parsnip. So I said to my grandma, I said, Nan, what would you do if you went to the supermarket and you couldn't get your food tomorrow? And she didn't have any answers for me. So I was like, okay, you're just going to starve, are you? All right, great. I said, have you considered growing vegetables? And my grandma said, no, we're not doing that. So, and I was like, right, how did you grow vegetables before? And she was like, oh, we dug it. It was a lot of back-breaking work. And I was like, I've met someone who has inspired a different way in me to get growing. All we need is some compost, cardboard, and some seeds, and let's see what's happened. And she was still really, really resistant. My grandma's from Leeds. Quite hard to sway an opinion. So it took me about 3 hours of debate with her to finally get to a place where she allowed me to have 36 square meters of her garden. And since that moment, I've just been in love with growing and feel like it's something that totally satisfies my soul. During the pandemic, it felt like the world was imploding, and I was able to go out to the garden and lose myself in the soil, in the seeds, nurturing life, watching the cycles, and it just, like, everything dissipated. So from a mental health perspective, it was an awakening for me, someone who'd worked in advertising for a long time, a very booze-driven industry, and just to discover something that was gentle on my soul that would help me carry on with a positive mindset in life. So I grew for the whole of the lockdown pandemic, and then I finally decided that I had to move back to London to try and make some money. I don't know if anyone knows about East Devon, but the only industry you can work in is tourism or hospitality, which I did my time in when I was a teenager. So yeah, I moved back to London. I was sat with my two friends, and I said, guys, why don't we not spend as much time in the pub and get an allotment together? And they all thought, oh yeah, that's a great idea. They'd seen the positive change in me, and they wanted to have a little bit of that. And then we were living in Lambeth. We looked up our local allotment waiting list, and it was 28 years. And that is 28 growing seasons you'll never, ever get again. Every year you miss a season, that's it, knowledge lost. So that sort of shook me. I started doing research all across the UK and realized that there was a similar story in nearly every town and city. The average waiting list across the UK is 18 years, and we've got 180,000 people on the waiting lists. That is only the tip of the iceberg for the appetite to growing. I tried to join a waiting list, and they said there's a 12-month wait on the waiting list for 28 years. And I was like, okay, how does that even work? So me and my friends, we sort of came up with an idea. We thought, well, if we could find private land and rent it off the people who own the private land, and then create a model that helps people get into growing easily, then let's go for it. My friend is a farmer's son on the edge of Bath. His family, after a lot of persuasion, let us take on an 8-acre field. And then we basically built a website in December 2021, and then we pretty much sold out by the middle of February, and we went, oh my God, we're going to have to do this now. So Roots became this idea where we give everyone a patch to get going on. They get seeds at the right time of year. They get plug plants at the right time of year. We run talks, workshops, events. We bring in experts, and we try to teach the community in person as well as digitally. We've shot 96 videos online, and I just want to give people the chance to get growing and experience that. When I lived in London, I lived in a second floor flat and stared at my next door neighbour's garden for ages, just willing some sort of green space. So trying to get people an area to grow is super important to growing into a more positive future.
Amazing. I want to come to you, Poppy, to round off the kind of introductions, and I'd love to know more about your personal story to growing up.
So I was born in London. I was raised by my family, and when I was 6, we moved to South Africa. So my kind of like pre-6 memories, although I was living in London, are actually weirdly of like being in a hedge with my mum and like the buddleia bush and picking snails into buckets and things like that. So I had like a very early kind of affinity, I guess, with the living world. Then in South Africa, we were really lucky to have a very outdoors lifestyle. And then when we came back to the UK, there was like a kind of like breakdown within our family. There wasn't really finances. And I kind of got to witness how engaging with growing a garden really transformed my mum and really supported our family through this kind of like tricky sort of process. Then when I was 18, moved to London, started working in fashion, very much resonate with that feeling of like out on the streets campaigning, but then you go and like do a photo shoot to sell fast fashion to people that they hate the clothes, they don't like how they look, you know, the whole complexity of how terrible the fashion industry is. So I was like, okay, what can I do that will help create a better world? I was understanding more about the climate crisis. I was understanding more about how the industrial fashion industry was impacting me as an individual and as other individuals in the world. And I wanted to do something that could kind of be a medicine, both for myself and for, I guess, a global community, if I could say that, I don't know, for people around me. And the thing that kind of like held those elements together was food, because I was looking at how I could heal myself as a human through eating well. And then was also understanding more about how food growing impacts, you know, the planet. And also understanding how crop production is also feeding into fashion. So it kind of, all of a sudden, I was seeing this very big picture. And I was like, okay, this is the world that I want to plug into. And so I guess my entry point into horticulture was more from like a systems perspective on where can I have a positive impact on myself and others. And so then I kind of trained in permaculture. And so again, my perspective is less kind of like beautiful displays and more systemic. And then, so I was doing that a bit by myself, and then eventually moved to Devon and now work co-running a community garden there outside town, where we really focus on trying to bring connection not just between people, but also between like the non-human community. So we're about trying to create community in many different ways, like stacking, I guess. So there's the interpersonal stuff, then there's like the relationship with land, the relationship with wildlife, relationship with food, all these different types of community that we try to engage with through what we do now. And then I also do community, I guess, through social media, reaching like lots of different people and hopefully inspiring people to consider an alternative worldview, let's say.
Amazing. Thank you, Poppy. Amazing. Okay, cool. I loved hearing all of your stories and how you've come to these points in your life. It feels like we're in a fascinating point in history, right? We know that we need these much more localized, decentralized food systems. We all know that a greater connection to nature is not only good for the environment, but as we've talked about on the panel, great for our mental health as well. And we're a generation that are really, you know, we're having a mental health crisis, and it's a hugely important solution. It does feel like there's a new sort of generation of growers that are coming forward, and indeed you guys are representative of them, and I know there's a bunch here today as well.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you, everyone. These are our heroes and the reason why we have built the Earth platform, to make accessible the incredible knowledge and passion and wisdom these amazing people are sharing with us. So thank you all very, very much.
Thank you everyone for tuning in today. You've been watching the Digital Earth Summit. This is our last, but definitely not least panel. It's our fashion, beauty, and restoration of biodiversity talk. This talk includes some of our incredible supporters and partners, like Dolma Clark from Vivobarefoot and Arizona Muse from Dirt Charity.
I've been really, really excited about this panel and to be sharing it with these like powerhouse women who are just doing incredible work in really, really hard spaces of fashion and beauty. So it's a pleasure to introduce the amazing Annabelle Kindersley, who's such an inspiration and a creator of something that I feel is probably a big part of all of our lives, Neal's Yard Remedies. She's the CEO and owner of that award-winning beauty and wellbeing brand. As an advisory member of the British Beauty Council Sustainable Beauty Coalition, Annabelle is a leading voice on sustainable business practices, dedicating her working life to driving positive change within the world of British luxury and the UK's beauty sector. So thank you so much for being here. We also have Dorma Clark in the middle, and Dorma is the strategic partnerships lead at Vivobarefoot, which I feel you do a lot more than that, but not that that's not already a big job, but yeah, Dorma does a lot of incredible work. And as you know, Vivo is a natural health lifestyle brand. Within Vivobarefoot, Dorma has launched the Live Barefoot Fund, and an in-house impact fund for research, innovation, and advocacy to regenerate human and planetary health. Works with Indigenous communities to preserve traditional craftsmanship, and opened a manufacturing centre in Ethiopia to provide jobs and add value on locally sourced materials. We also have Alice Robinson at the end, who is the author of the brilliant Field Fork Fashion, a book that chronicles the making of her 2019 design collection, Bullock 374, which was created entirely from a single animal. Her work explores the relationship between food and fashion by connecting farming to product design while revealing the story behind leather material. Then, just next to Alice is Ruth Rands, who is an activist, entrepreneur, and avid knitter. Ruth's mission is to transform the fashion textile system through her yarn and knitwear brands, Herd and Herd Wool, via her in-depth understanding of brand storytelling and supply chains. And last but by no means least is the brilliant Arizona Muse, who is one of fashion sector's most highly regarded champions of sustainability. She's been a model for the past 13 years and is the founder of the incredible charity called Dirt, which launched just in 2021, which she runs still herself. Dirt's charity mission is to turn fashion into a climate solution by regenerating the soil in which our clothes are grown. Dirt Charity regenerates soil by supporting the biodynamic farming movement and has already partnered with brands such as Rye, Anya Hindmarsh, Weleda on projects that support the transition of the fashion sector to grow all its raw materials in a way that no longer harms the earth and humans, but brings well-being and regeneration. So big round of applause for our incredible panelists. So I would love to start with a question about why you do this work, because it would be really easy to take the other path in the fashion and beauty industry, like especially Arizona, almost like being a model, like you must be like having to turn down a lot of big jobs. I mean, everyone is really going against the grain in an industry that is like really pushing you towards mass consumerism, towards unconscious products, towards sourcing your materials unethically. And there are so many excuses and issues in supply chains that you can hide behind. So I guess my first question is like, why? What was your catalyst moment for you to really dedicate yourself to this work? So I'm going to start with you, Annabelle.
Such a big question. Well, you probably roll back a bit. We have family who are big proponents of organic farming. That's when hippie parents grew up eating Crank's food. So it's always, you've got the sort of the seed bed of who we were. And then we took over Neal's Yard Remedies in 20 years ago. And the idea behind that really was not about having beauty products at all. It was really about, we've got these lovely products, but it's about how we source them, the sort of giving back the sort of ethical supply chain, and really using business as a force for good. And I think that's really been not just the catalyst, but the using our business as a platform for change and to demonstrate that business can be ethical and sustainable. And you are exactly right, Christabel. It's not been easy. It's going against the grain for the last 20 years, turning left when you should turn right to get more profit. But yet you want to wake up in the morning and feel good about yourself, and you want to give back. And you know that if you have centrally a product that is beautiful and it makes people feel good, the well-being element of it is really important. And I think it's not just well-being about how it makes you feel, and I'm a homeopath, so well-being is very important to me, but it's about well-being of the planet, biodiversity. And I think the real thing that has been the big that carries us through is campaigning, and using it as a campaigning tool to campaign for biodiversity and nature. And it's just not enough to be able to just buy your stuff and take it in. It's about where does that come from and the impact it has on the planet that you're around. And so having a coalition of businesses and standing up and asking the government, there's so much. But yeah, that's what keeps me going. And yeah, Neal's Yard Remedies are lovely wild rose beauty balms, and all those things are the Trojan horse.
Amazing. And I love your like non-competitive attitude within what seems to be quite a competitive industry, where you really want to be supporting and bringing together all the brands so that you can be campaigning and stronger together. Arizona, what was like your catalyst moment, or what kind of keeps you going in this incredible but no doubt challenging work?
For me, first of all, thank you so much for doing this conference. Thank you, Christabel, and thank you, Ruby, to your sister as well. This is amazing. What you've done today is so good, such a high standard of knowledge, such a high standard of truth-telling, so thank you. I'm really enjoying every single minute. My answer to that question is, I wouldn't be doing the activism that I'm doing now if I didn't know what I know about the fashion industry, about supply chains, about climate. And I think knowledge is really the answer. I was a model for 6 years before I became an activist. And that was just because I didn't know anything about the fashion industry. I didn't know, in spite of being lucky, and I had a great career that went really well, really fast. So I was working with the highest level fashion labels in all the major cities of the world and shooting with the best photographers and working with the biggest designers. Nobody was talking about the fashion supply chain. No one knew. I would have carried on that way, probably, had I not started to learn about the exploitation and about the environmental degradation and about the cruelty. And as soon as I started learning, I wanted to change everything. So I really think we still need to keep going with education, because once we understand where our clothes come from and what is really happening to get them into our wardrobes, it makes you not want them anymore. And it makes you want to change the way they are produced.
Thank you, Arizona. Dulma, what is driving you, and what is the vision that you and also Vivobarefoot are like trying to overcome? Like, what is the mission that you're on?
Hey, hi. I just got distracted because my kids just walked into the room, and I feel I'm under a lot of pressure now. So, okay, so it's a family business. So many of you just heard a presentation by Galahad. We're on a mission to reconnect people to nature and human natural potential, starting from feet in a literal sense. You take the shoes off, connect to the earth, but there is a bigger picture question around well-being. Hence, we're working with you. We're like trying to build this coalition of like-minded 360 organizations, how we can create this as much as possible access for people, as simple as possible, to connect to their well-being and natural health, and then be healthy from feet, gut, to mind, to like community around you. And then if we can be healthy in our body and mind, like surely we can be a way better participants in the community around you. Like we can be really, good to nature. Like there's bigger picture question around reconnection to nature. We are nature, nature is us. This is what we talk about a lot, and with like how do we embrace it? So that's what we're working on now, and that covers the indigenous projects that we run, covers all the materials innovations that we do, all the B Corp communities that we're building. I'm originally a human rights lawyer. I was with the UN and did a lot of like work with charities and philanthropic funds, and then more I learned about like what are these sustainable systems. Yeah, like, and business was super fascinating to me, because when I was a student at LSE, I had this like kind of almost by good lucky circumstances ended up at the lecture of Dr. Mohammed Yunus. And that was the first time, like, when I go, wow, this is actually totally makes sense, and how you can create kind of this more organic, natural system, but also not going too far away from what we have already. So how we can improve it. So
I'll stop there.
Thank
you. And Ruth, what is the vision that is driving you, but like both in the sort of in the destruction that you are trying to transform and move away from, and the vision of where you want to be headed towards with Herd and all your brilliant work.
Thank you. I guess the catalyst moment for me, there were two real moments that sort of I can pinpoint on the journey to establishing Herd that really formed what it was. And the first one, I was living in America. I was living in California. And I became aware of Fibershed and the Fibershed movement, which essentially is a blueprint for building circularity into fiber systems, which was it was such a moment of awakening for me, because I just didn't know that you could be so uncompromising and to have a blueprint there. I just assumed that, okay, everyone was just going to pick this up and there's going to be brands everywhere doing it. So when I moved back to the UK, I just thought, I was a knitter, I am a knitter, and I just assumed I would be able to both buy yarn and knitwear made to these uncompromising principles, which are local fibers, local dyes, and local people. So the concept of making a jumper, a t-shirt, a pair of jeans within 150 miles of where it's actually grown, so connecting the clothes to the soil and connecting the people to the clothes to the soil. And no, there weren't any. And at the time, I actually had a food business. So I ran a wild organic seaweed business for 10 years. And I got to sort of the end of that journey because I had this very beneficial raw material and kind of couldn't really bear to dilute it and turn something that was an ingredient there available for people to use into something that was more processed. So Fibershed was and remains one of the sort of guiding principles behind Herd. And the second moment was I was traveling up and down Lancashire, Yorkshire, trying to kind of get to the bottom of why there were no local wool knitwear brands or yarn brands. And I came across a breed called a Blueface Leicester, which I'm sure most of you have never heard of, but hopefully very soon you will. Yeah, now you do. And the Blueface Leicester has a fleece akin to merino. So rather than shipping across a supply chain of 18,000 miles, going through at least 7 different countries, and passing through many different toxic chemicals and waste and pollution along the way, I saw this opportunity to create something that was luxurious, so customers would not have to come, and I do think this is important, we wouldn't have to compromise on experience and hand feel, but we could also be absolutely pioneering in our sustainability according to the Fibershed principles. So now Herd is essentially an ecosystem. We buy fleeces from farmers in Lancashire, Yorkshire, Cumbria, and Northumberland. We process those without chemicals in Yorkshire. And hope to connect people better, essentially, with where their clothes come from and how they're processed.
Thank you. Over to you, love.
My catalyst moment happened when I was studying for an accessories master's at the Royal College of Art after many years of desperately wanting to be able to enter a fashion industry, and I had transitioned from women's wear into accessory design, so was introduced to a material that is sort of championed within the industry because of its versatility, durability, leather material that we all use and interact with in our lives. And I had many questions for the material because now for the first time it was something that I would be using to make product and put out into the world. And I grew up in Shropshire in part of an agricultural family. Father was a farm vet, and I really wanted to understand the material that I was using and what it meant for the food system it had come from. So I went to many leather wholesalers and spoke to many leather workers and to tanneries to ask, where does this raw material come from? Sort of how has your leather been made, and what farm has it been produced by? The hide, that is. Quite now, questions I realise are naive because the complexity and the globalisation of the leather industry is so vast. And I saw that disconnect as such an exciting opportunity to really be able to understand this material as a product that could come from agriculture and could be connected to landscapes and communities of people that are wanting to produce food and steward land in a way that could be a part of a fashion industry and vision for fashion. And because I didn't have any of those answers, I didn't know what that material looked like. I didn't know what type of leather comes from a longhorn cattle that has been reared outdoors its entire life on perhaps the Nep estate. What does that look like? What does that skin look like when it's turned into a shoe? Can it become a shoe? What processing facilities would I need to be able to work with in order to really understand where I sat as a designer in this very long chain of events? So really understanding I knew nothing was a catalyst to try to collaborate and learn more.
Thank you all so much. It's so inspiring to hear like all the diversity of catalyst moments and all the different expressions of solutions to biodiversity and to ecosystem restoration. And by that I mean also not just like active restoration, but preventing further ecosystems from being degraded, which is an essential part of ecosystem restoration. Just thank you to this incredible panel. I think I'm really happy that we've kind of ended with a panel that's like looking more like the business and industry, because you know, Earth is about galvanizing like peer-driven, mass mobilized people, like everyday people, to be able to participate in ecosystem restoration. But equally, like, it's just incredible that like there are these amazing businesses, and also, you know, Dorma and Annabelle, businesses that are like really, you know, big and established now and thriving, as well as like smaller businesses that are coming up and like doing incredible innovation and like really flipping the narrative about where our products come from and how we can be working with the people who are producing with real respect and value and community and honor of the human spirit and of the more than human as well. So just like deeply grateful to you all. Thank you so much, Arizona. Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing in reweaving people back through story. And yeah, I really invite everyone to just learn more about these incredible organizations, because as I was saying before, we didn't get time to go into like the actual stories about the incredible farmers and people that everyone's working with. So yeah, big round of applause for the panel, please. And I'm just going to say a few words about Earth, if that's okay, before we all leave. And just really grateful for you all being here, as I mentioned. And I really hope this day has felt like a celebration, because that was the intention. I hope it doesn't feel like we've sort of skirted across problems, but that was intentional, because I do believe like enough people maybe know about the ecological crisis. And if instead of investing all of our time and energy in continually educating ourselves, of course we need to be educated, but all of that energy into educating and articulating the problem without actually being able to learn how to grow food, to be able to mobilize community, to be able to restore your local river or build up biodiversity. Like, what are we actually doing apart from sounding really clever, which it's great to try and do, but like that's why we've been so solution oriented. It's about uniting people and moving beyond like binary narratives and polarization that we're seeing increasingly in the environmental movement, peddling of false solutions which will do nothing but perpetuate the problem. And really the power is in our hands, not as consumers, but as active citizens, as participants in nature, as ecosystem engineers. In the other room, we've got incredible speakers who've been talking about indigenous land stewardship and traditional ecological knowledge in the Amazon. The reason why it's been found out to be so biodiverse and fertile isn't because of absence of humans. It's because for millennia there have been millions of indigenous people in thousands or tens of thousands of communities or hundreds of thousands of communities who were doing agriculture. And you can compare that with the narrative that we have today in mainstream media of get farmers off the land. It's all the farmers' fault, start producing food vertically, which would only play into the hands of corporations more and more. Like, this is just all a system problem, which like is a big thing, but also systems are constantly evolving and changing. Like they're not stuck. Everything is in constant flux and movement and motion. And so I think there is so much opportunity if we realize that we can take power into our own hands. We can learn together. We can act together. We can literally grow together. And Earth is a charity that exists to do exactly that. So please check out all the courses if you haven't already. Thank you to the 42 incredible speakers who've been with us today. Thank you to the incredible founding partners, Farmacy, Vivobarefoot, and Neal's Remedies. Thank you to Joseph Rowntree Foundation. Yeah, there's such an incredible web and constellation behind Earth, and we're just at the beginning of our journey. Just really invite you into that constellation so we can do it together. Thank you, everyone.